This is a Sports Catastrophe production.
Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter and welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, June 22nd, 1991, the NHL draft was underway. It was a big draft. Not just for the number one pick in the draft being who he is, but for many teams, it would change things. And all that. One major fact you should know before I get into the business of the number one pick overall is that the last player drafted from the 91 NHL draft to be active was Ray Whitney, who retired after the 2014 season. And also, he has the most games played and points by someone from the 91 NHL draft. Games played 1330 and points 1,064. Didn't think he'll be there. Alright, so it's the 91 NHL draft. The 91 NHL season saw Pittsburgh beat the surprising Cinderella Minnesota North Stars, who somehow, despite being below 500, managed to shock the Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues in the divisional playoffs, and then beat Edmonton for the conference title. Of course, Edmonton were the defending Stanley Cup champs. Pittsburgh had Mario Lemieux, Jaromir Jagr, and Tom Barrasso, and they beat the North Stars in 6 games. Mind you, North Stars were up 2-1 at one point. But now it was time for the major thing, the draft. The big draft. And there was a consensus number one pick. It's kind of like Connor Bedard this year. But the consensus number one was a tall, strong, 6'4" centerman from Oshawa by the name of Eric Lindros. He was the real deal. And Oshawa won the 1990 Memorial Cup with him. Of course, I'm a little bitter because the team that Oshawa beat for the Memorial Cup is, well, you guessed it, Kitchener! So, anyway, Kitchener and other things aside, Eric Lindros was a pretty good player and all that. The unfortunate part was that Eric Lindros came with baggage in the form of Bonnie and Carl Lindros, his parents, who were kind of called helicopter hockey parents. And this is the 1990s we're talking about. This is not 2020s when helicopter parents are more prevalent. Not a lot prevalent, but, you know, more prevalent. Emphasis on the word more. But anything. They would basically chastise the coaches for not playing Eric a lot, or they hate on his line mates and all that. Man, pathetic. But Lindros did have the talent. There was one tiny little problem, though. The number one pick belonged to the Quebec Nordiques, who were really terrible. The Nordiques had a period of upraisal, but then they nosedived past the 87 season. So Quebec would have the number one overall pick again. The previous year, in 1990, they picked Ole Nolan, which was a decent move, and then he went to Colorado with the team, but then was traded to San Jose, and the rest was history. But the fact of the matter is that Eric Lindros didn't want to go to Quebec. And of course, at the time, people thought that, oh, Lindros is just a big baby because he doesn't want to be in a French culture. Despite warnings from the Lindros family and his agent, Quebec decided to take Eric Lindros. They had to. They probably didn't have another idea who to take. And they did it. They took Lindros, but he refused to don the Quebec Nordiques jersey, which is kind of awkward. It's not the first time. Mario Lemieux in '84, when he was number one pick of the Penguins, refused to wear the Penguins jersey. But that was because he was negotiating around a contract, which would make him the highest paid rookie in history at the time. But it worked out. Lemieux was worth the money. Lindros just sucked and all that. So anyway, in the second pick went to the San Jose Sharks. They decided that the expansion Sharks could not have the number one pick. Wouldn't be fair. Although they would actually be hypocritical because the next year, Tampa had the number one pick. And Ottawa had number 2. But regardless, San Jose, with the number 2 pick, took Pat Falloon, a right winger from Spokane. Now, I talked about Eric Lindros winning the 1990 Memorial Cup. Well, Pat Falloon and his Spokane Chiefs won the 1991 Memorial Cup. So, San Jose decided to go with the best player from the Memorial Cup, doing their research. And Pat Falloon would be the first Sharks draft pick ever. The number 3 pick was Toronto's. Toronto was hoping to get somebody. But wait a minute. You maybe are saying, Toronto didn't pick 3rd overall in 1991. Well, of course they didn't. Because they did not have that pick. The Devils had the pick. In 1989, the Leafs needed what they call a power play quarterback. And found a defenseman by the name of Tom Kurvers from the New Jersey Devils. They wanted Kurvers. So they picked him up, and then they sent a first-round draft pick that way. That was how desperate the Leafs were. To send a first-round draft pick for Tom Kurvers? Was it worth it? No, because freaking the Leafs got rid of Kurvers, and he bounced around with the Canucks and Islanders in the 91 season, if memory serves me correctly, because I know I have his hockey card with the Islanders from 91. It wasn't worth it. And who did the Devils pick with the Leafs selection? Why, Scott freaking Niedermayer from Kamloops. Now that's right, Scott Niedermayer could have been a Toronto Maple Leaf, and maybe the Leafs would have had their power play quarterback through the draft. But no, the Leafs just had to screw everything up with that move. So that's what happened. So Scott Niedermayer was a New Jersey Devil, and the Leafs probably felt terrible about that move. 4th pick went to the New York Islanders, and they took Scott LaChance from Boston University. Who would be a decent defenseman? Winnipeg, with the 5th pick, took Aaron Ward. Yes, that Aaron Ward from TSN fame, from the University of Michigan, for defense. Philadelphia had the 6th pick and took Peter Forsberg. That's right, Peter Forsberg was in the 91 draft, and the Flyers took him. The Sharks could have taken him, the Islanders could have taken him, the Jets could have taken him. I don't blame the Devils for taking Niedermayer, obviously. But man, Peter Forsberg to the Flyers. Vancouver 7th overall took Alex Stojanov from Hamilton when they had an NHL team in the 90s. Actually, Stojanov would be a bust. However, he's not completely a bust because the Canucks decided to swing him to the Penguins years later for Marcus Naslund. And basically, Vancouver had the last laugh. Ha ha ha. The North Stars picked 8th and took Richard Mafficek from Saskatoon. Hartford went 9th and took Patrick Poulin from St. Hyacinthe. And 10th overall went to Detroit, who took Martin Lapointe from Laval. Not bad. Pretty good pick. The Devils took Brian Rolston 11th. Buffalo took Philippe Boucher 13th. Alex Kovalev was taken 15th by the New York Rangers. Big move, taking a guy from the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was crumbling at the time. Marcus Naslund, yeah, as I mentioned, the trade with Stojanov. He was drafted in the 91 draft too. He was 16th overall by the Penguins. So the Penguins and Canucks traded 91 players from the 91 draft for each other. Boston took Glenn Murray 18th. Edmonton took Martin Ruszczynski 20th. Dean McCammon was the last first-round pick, 22nd overall to the Blackhawks. Round 2 saw Ray Whitney be picked by the Sharks in the first pick of the second round went to the Sharks. And they took Ray Whitney, Pat Falloon's Spokane teammate. Little did people know that Ray Whitney would outshine his Spokane teammate and be part of Sharks lore in 95 when he scored that double overtime goal against Calgary in Game 7 that made them face Detroit in the second round. Siggy Palffy went 26th to the Islanders. Sandis Ozolinsh went 30th to San Jose. Man, the Sharks did pretty well for their first draft. Anyway, round 3, Yannick Perreault went to Toronto. Chris Osgood went to Detroit. That's a good move. I'm just taking a look at the All-Stars and all that. Alex Shednick went 4th round to LA. Round 5 saw Mary Sierkowski from Poland go to Boston. Man, Boston went Polish. Round 6, Dmitry Yushkevich went to the Flyers. He would soon become a Leaf legend. Round 7 is when you get all the unknowns. Round 8, the Leafs took Dmitry Mironov from the Soviet Union. Well, it was a tough move to get someone from the Soviet Union still. Quebec took Jani Laakkonen, defenseman from Finland. Corey Hirsch went in the 8th round to the New York Rangers. I implore you to buy Corey Hirsch's autobiography. It's very hard to take and all that. If you're not up for a bumpy ride within a book, then don't buy the book, but buy the book. Now remember, the draft went through 12 rounds. There weren't really any major guys. There were a few players who played in the NHL past the 8th round. Scott Dean of the went 264th and last to the Blackhawks. Well, it was huge. The 91 NHL draft was huge. But of course, the big drama was Eric Lindros. So Eric Lindros basically didn't want to play for Quebec, and people thought that it was the French culture. It was so tough on Lindros that even though he played for the 91 Canada team in the Canada Cup, kind of like the World Cup of hockey, they had to play a game in Quebec City, and he was mercilessly booed despite the fact he was playing for Canada. Well, he asked for it. People were mocking him for it. Lindros actually didn't go to the Nordiques out of Oshawa in 91. He went back to junior in 92 and tore it up. Fortunately for people, Oshawa did not tear up the Canadian Hockey League. That was Kamloops and Scott Niedermayer. The Devils sent Niedermayer back to New Jersey. Back to Kamloops, and he was huge in that one. Of course, with Lindros sitting out, and, he played for the Canadian Olympic team in 92, which was good, and threatening to sit out. He would rather sit out than play for Quebec, which is kind of stupid. The NHL pressured Quebec to do something about it. Because if Lindros refused to sign with the Nordiques, he would be back in the 93 draft. And maybe Ottawa would tank for him. Well, Quebec decided they needed to trade Lindros. And so on June 29, 1992, they figured they had a deal with the New York Rangers that would have sent, among others, Tony Amonte, Alex Kovalev, and John Van Beesbroek to the Nordiques. But unfortunately, that was not the case, as Philadelphia made the deal with Quebec first, as Larry Bertuzzi, the arbitrator, and uncle of Todd Bertuzzi, would state. That trade would be huge because it helped Quebec/Colorado. Not right off the bat, but it took a while. Chris Simon, Jocelyn... No, who did they trade? Well, Quebec got Chris Simon, Ron Hextall. I'm surprised Philly would trade away Ron Hextall. Ron freaking Hextall. Yeah, they traded him. So they traded Hextall, Chris Simon, Steve Duchesne, Mike Ricci, and the draft rights to one Peter Forsberg. Now, Lindros in Philly wasn't that bad. Philly was a decent team, and he did get to the 97 Stanley Cup final, but lost to the Red Wings. But yeah, injuries and infighting with Bobby Clarke, who was general manager, would ruin Lindros' Philly tenure. He went to the Rangers, and then after a few years, he went to the Leafs, and then the Dallas Stars to end his career. Of course, the trade would help Quebec/Colorado, as I said, but not in the long run. It took to 96. Well, Quebec did have Ron Hextall, but they flipped him back to the Islanders for a few players. But yeah, the big move was Peter Forsberg. It took till 95 for Forsberg to come play in the NHL, but it was worth it. He won the Calder for Rookie of the Year. So yeah, that was what happened. So the Lindros deal worked out well for the wrong sides. And Eric Lindros had to learn things. Lindros did say that he didn't like to play for Quebec because of the way Pierre Pagé had ruined the Nordiques and all that, just on how their poor on-ice product. But then again, I don't blame him for not wanting to go to Quebec. He would probably be just a one-man show, and Quebec probably would not have improved, and probably would have traded him, because they're like, our team sucks, and let's get rid of this bad guy, if you will. So anyway, that's all I got to say about the 91 NHL draft. As a Leaf fan, I'm pissed, because Scott Niedermayer freaking went on to win, 4 Stanley Cups? If I remember right? 3 with the Devils, 1 with the Ducks. The Leafs could have had him, and maybe we would have rebuilt that way. Because let's face it, the 93 Leafs defensively was not the best defensively I could see, but at least they were decent. They were decent. Anyway, I'm jumped. I'm going to do.